Greatest thing in Michigan is to be a child of God. Amen. You haven't forgotten. It really is great. Good to be with you this morning. And as you know, when you see me, that Tad is out of town and he's not sick. And I really appreciate the opportunity of being able to be here this morning with you. I'd like to start my lesson a little bit different this morning, and that is just to share a few scriptures with you and get us to think about these verses together. And so if you would, yes. This is the passage I had read just a moment ago, is that I will praise the name of God with a song. I will magnify him with thanksgiving. And this will please the Lord more than an ox or a bull with horns and hoofs. And let the oppressed see it and be glad. You who seek God, let your hearts revive. I will praise the name of God with a song. I will magnify him with thanksgiving. What a statement. What a thought for us to consider that it's a mark of all true Christians that we will develop a longing inside of us that we want to magnify the God of our salvation. That we just want to think about him, that we want to magnify him. Another passage to consider is the one in Psalms 40:16. May all who seek thee rejoice and be glad in thee, and may those who love thy salvation say continually, great is the Lord. You know, when I read Psalms, sometimes there are phrases that you can almost see them shouting it in their singing. There are phrases like Psalms 34:3 that says, oh, magnify the Lord with me and let us exalt his name together. You just can't help but feel they were worshiping God. Or great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. Now we come to the New Testament and we find out that even though we have learned from the Old Testament that the people were crying out to God, it's also to be a longing that you and I have, because 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, so whether you eat or drink or whatever you do, do all to the glory of God. So we learn from the Old Testament what we also learn in the New Testament, and that is that we do everything so that God can be magnified. If you have met with the living Son of God, if you have joined yourself to him in biblical faith, if you have believed in him and you have obeyed him, then doesn't your heart say, just like Paul says, my eager expectation and hope that I shall not at all be ashamed, but that with full courage now, as always, Christ will be magnified in my body, whether by life or by death. I think it's a mark of a focused Christian man or woman that we long to magnify the God of our salvation and his Son, Jesus Christ. I think it's one of the marks that you see in Christians as they mature. But David says, that we're to magnify. And so, like it's usually my habit, I start looking up word definitions. And magnify comes with two different slants. And one of them is that it can make something appear greater than what it really is. That is, I could take the magnifying glass out of my desk drawer, and I can take something really small and look at it with my magnifying glass, and it becomes larger than what it really is. Or it also means that something is just so great and so magnificent that when I magnify it, I'm just making it known. Okay? I'm not making God bigger than he is. All I'm doing is making him seen as great and big as he is. How magnificent his love is, how magnificent his salvation is. And so with these two different kinds of magnifying, we're really kind of a telescope. We're the ones that are coming along and we're saying, just look how magnificent God is. Just look how vast and how big and how wonderful he really is. We're telescope Christians. We're not making him bigger. We're just saying, look how big he is. Look how wonderful he is. Look how sensational he is. And so when David comes along and says, that we should magnify God with thanksgiving, he's not saying that we make God bigger. We're just making him known as he really is and stuff. And so we're told to telescope him here. There's nobody, there's nothing more superior than God himself. And so when we're magnifying him, we're just saying, look how great he is. There's no one superior to him. I like the passage here because when we're talking about the greatness of God, it ought to be obvious to everybody. And yet, like the apostle says here in Romans chapter 1, ever since the creation of the world, his invisible nature, namely his eternal power and deity, has been clearly perceived in the things that have been made. So men are without excuse. Although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God or give him thanks. Do you realize how many things around us tell us how great God is? Nature tells us there's a God all the time. Pepper and I went outside this morning, and I told somebody already this morning that the geese were honking and the fog was so thick, we looked up, we couldn't even see them. But they were there, and God created them. And his creation is so great, there's no excuse for a person not to know God. And yet some could see the same scene and not see God. There's no excuse. It ought to be obvious. So why is it that some see God and some don't? It isn't due to the sinful insensitivity and the forgetfulness of our hearts? Don't ask me to say that 2 or 3 times. Once is bad enough. Wow. A lot of God's greatest attributes and most awesome and loving deeds just kind of seem to pass in one ear and out the other and doesn't even cause a ripple of emotion in our hearts, because seeing we're not seeing and hearing we're not hearing right here, because our hearts are in such a condition, that we need to beg God, like Peter did, to open up the eyes of our heart that we might know. So we could really know and feel the hope to which he has called us to, and the riches of his glory, the inheritance that we have as his saints, and what is the immeasurable greatness of its power in us who believe. The Ephesian writer tells us in chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. But what if God even graciously removes the scales from our eyes so that we can be moved by his greatness that we see in front of us, but we're still prone to forget what we've seen? Haven't we all had experiences like that? Moments when we feel the goodness and the faithfulness of God that so intensely that we're just filled with joy and happiness, and we almost just want to hug somebody and tell them all about it. And then maybe just a short time later, something happens in our life and we're just discouraged and we forget all about that moment that was so great, because now we're focused on the moment that's not great and we forget God's wonderful care once because of where we're at now. Why? Because we so easily forget the greatness and the care and the goodness of God. We forget the evidence that Scripture gives us. Isn't that why David even preaches to himself? And he tells us, he says, "Bless the Lord, O my soul, and all that is within me. Bless his holy name. Bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits." Why? Because David says, I have a tendency of forgetting. And I don't want to forget. He later says in Psalm 77, he says, soul, do not forget what God has done for you. Asaph says, I will call to mind the deeds of the Lord. Yea, I will remember thy wonders of old. I will meditate on all thy work and muse on thy mighty deeds. Thy way, O God, is holy. What God is great like our God? Wow. See, we're called to be telescopes. People who make the greatness of God seem as great as it really is. That's what it means for you and I to magnify God. And we have a tendency of not doing that as much as we should. We're telescopes. We reveal God to other people and to ourselves, by the way. We remind ourselves how great he is. But we can't magnify what we have not seen or something that we quickly forget. And so maybe our first task is we've got to see and remember the greatness and the goodness of God. So maybe we need to pray for God to open up our heart. Maybe we need to preach to our own souls. Soul, don't forget all of his benefits. But suppose we have seen the greatness of God. Suppose that we do remember the great power of God. Maybe we've read passages like Revelations in chapter 11 and verse 17, or Nahum in chapter 1 and verse 3. Maybe we have studied the wisdom of God and how great it is in Romans chapter 11 and verse 33, or maybe in Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 19. Maybe we have studied the mercy of God and how great it is in Psalms 57:10 and Psalms 103 verse 11. I didn't put all those on slides because you'd be here longer than we intend to be. I'm only saying that if we have studied those and we've seen God's magnified before us, his greatness, then as human telescopes, what do we do with that so that God can appear as great as he really is? Well, Psalm 69:30 says, I'll give you an answer. You magnify God with thanksgiving. You're thankful for all his greatness. You are people of gratitude because you have seen and heard and studied his greatness, and you're thankful. You're thankful for it. See, gratitude glorifies God. But why does it? Because givers are more glorious than receivers. See, benefactors are more glorious than beneficiaries. And when we thank God, we're acknowledging and displaying to others that He's the one who's the giver. We're just the receiver here. He's the benefactor. We're the beneficiaries here. And so we pay Him the highest compliment when we admit that what we have received comes from Him. The blessings that we have come from Him. The health that we have comes from Him. The answered prayers that we have come from Him. There was a family that had 3 sons, and I won't mention their name because some of you may know them. But if I took something from one of my brothers, without asking, my family had this weird habit that when you were found out, you had to take it back to your brother and return it to him. No big deal. I'm not done with the story yet. You not only had to return it to him, but he was made, as you returned it, to say, "Thank you." I took it. He's saying, "Thank you." Thank you is a compliment. I'm not done. Tom, say you're welcome. If you think the thank you wasn't sincere, neither was the welcome. You're welcome. So there's this thank you that wasn't sincere. Now you've got this welcome that's not very sincere right here because it was mumbled out of force. Okay. And so, everybody's been through a scenario, something like this, okay? And because saying thank you is supposed to be a compliment, and when it's not, it's supposed to magnify people, but it didn't, okay? In that scenario, it might have been good that parents made us do this little scenario right here because the compliment was supposed to make me indebted to the one who gave me the thank you, but it didn't work in that situation because, you see, it was forced, all right? When you're angry, you're forced to do something, and you hate to pay a compliment when you're angry. If I'm angry with God, I'm not going to magnify Him. If I'm not complimentary, if I'm not full of gratitude to God for what He's blessed me with, you see, I'm not going to magnify Him as my benefactor. I'm not going to see myself as the beneficiary of all that He's given me right here. And so when gratitude springs up in our hearts toward God, then He's magnified as the wealthy source of the blessings that we have in our life right here. He's acknowledged as the giver, and we're seen as the receiver. And we magnify Him. And when we don't see Him that way, we're not full of gratitude and we're not magnifying. There's a very good reason sometimes why we don't feel like magnifying God. And a lot of times, it's because it distracts from our own glory. That by some natural way, a lot of us love to get. You see, if I get my glory, I feel good. But I have to set that aside to give God all the glory. You see, I want to feel self-sufficient. I want to be filled with glory too. And David talks about that too, because if you look at Psalms 35, verse 27, he says, "Let those who desire my vindication shout for joy and be glad and say forevermore, the Lord be magnified." Oh, I like that verse. The only trouble of it is the verse before, he talks about the other group of people. And he says in verse 26, let them be clothed with shame and dishonor who magnify themselves against me. He's saying in those two verses, there's two groups of people. You and I both know them, by the way. And those two groups of people right here, there is a world of difference between the two. There are those who love to magnify God, and there are those who like to magnify themselves. And you and I know both bunches, don't we? Yeah. And the root of all ingratitude is the love of your own greatness. I want people to notice me. I want people to see what I'm doing. I want people to see the blessings I give out. They're indebted to me. Look what I do. I like what one writer said when he talks about us being beneficiaries of God. He says, we are cripples leaning on the cross-shaped crutch of Jesus Christ. We are paralytics living minute by minute in the iron lung of God's mercy. We are children asleep in heaven's stroller. And he says, natural man hates to think of himself in these images. Unworthy beneficiary, crippled, paralytic child, they rob him of all the glory by making himself give it all to God. Wow. Wow. We love our own glory. We prize our own self-sufficiency. And we hate to see ourselves as sin-sick and helpless and in need of God and the salvation that Jesus Christ gives us. Wow, I know people who hate to see themselves that way. There's an interesting connection between what we're looking at in Psalm 69 and a passage in Psalms 50 and Psalms 51. And this passage says, I will magnify God with thanksgiving. This will please the Lord more than the ox or bull with horns and hoofs. Brother, you can tell me later, how did you get so much out of this psalm? Okay? But I had a lot of fun with this. Watch this. Okay? I've been accused of worse. All right? In Psalms 51, I want you to notice when you get to the ox or a bull with horns and hoofs, most people would read through that and just take off. I just had too much fun. So bear with me, because in Psalms 50, if you look at the passage there, he says, I will accept no bull from your house. Now, when I first read that, you have to remember a bull with 4 legs. Okay, I will accept no bull from your house, no he-goat from your fold, for every beast of the forest is mine, the cattle on 1,000 hills. I know all the birds of the air, all I don't know what I got there. All the what? That's not right. Misprint. Anyway, all the moves in the field are mine. That's not right. Misprint. If I was hungry, I would not tell you, for the world and all that's in it is mine. I don't eat the flesh of bulls or drink the blood of goats. Offer to God a sacrifice of thanksgiving and pay your vows to the Most High. Anyway, one of the reasons why God is not pleased with the offering of an ox or a bull or a goat was that when someone came to offer their sacrifice and you brought in your best ox or your best goat or whatever bull to be sacrificed, a lot of times the giver would show up and you bought your prize, I don't know, bull. I mean, this thing would be a state fair winner. The most faultless one that you have in your whole herd. You would come walking in with that bull behind you. I mean, he was a winner. He was a showstopper. And you would hand him over to the priest to be sacrificed, you see. And it was like This is my gift to God, and it is really going to be something for God. God is going to be enriched by it. I mean, whatever God is, deficient in, this bull is going to make up for it. Don't forget to put the blue ribbon with him when you sacrifice him. Do you understand the mindset that could happen when you brought your best in? I mean, everybody around said, oh, what a love gift that man gave in his prize-winning blue ribbon bull. What did I help God out? If God was hungry, this guy is going to help him out. Do you see what was wrong with that worship? Say yes. Yeah. All right. It was an insult to God for me to come that way. Because God could have said, every bull on earth is mine. You didn't bring me anything special. The cattle on 1,000 hills belong to me. You can give me a bull or an ox. I mean, it's already mine before you even give it. See, here is self-exaltation again. See, look how great I am. I'm given the best one. I'll tell you what, there is not going to be a bull given today like mine. Do you see the pride? Do you see the lifting up of see, even in the practice of religion, I can do that. And I can belittle my God in my worship when it's full of me. And God is not magnified at all. But there's an antidote for this. And the antidote is I offer to God a sacrifice of thanks. Because you see, in that sacrifice, I wasn't thinking. I was just doing. I was going through the motions okay. I was doing everything some of the priests taught me, best of my flock, all that kind of stuff I was doing. But I wasn't acknowledging at all that God gave me the bull. I was not accepting the fact of a lowly status that I received that from God and that God was the giver and I was the receiver and that I was just worshiping God by giving back. And I wanted to magnify God by giving it. Do you see what was wrong? In Psalms 51, verse 17, the sacrifice acceptable to God is a broken spirit, a broken and contrite heart. O God, thou wilt not despise. Not though, thou will not despise. Where's the spell check when you need it? Well, it wasn't spelled wrong, it's just the wrong word. Okay? Wow, but just think about it. Until the stiffness of an arrogant neck is broken and the hardness of a self-sufficient heart is softened, I can't genuinely thank the true God and magnify him. The last part of our text says, let the oppressed see it and be glad. You who seek God, let your hearts revive. Well, a lot of this passage that we've looked at has been bad news for anybody, intent on maintaining their pride and their love for their own glory and committed to their own self-sufficiency. And they're, but they're, not bad news to the oppressed. Watch what he says here. To those who have come kind of to the end of their rope and those who are kind of exhausted from trying to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps, we got some good news here at the end. What are God's demands? What is the all-sufficient God who owns and controls things and demands from his creatures that he's made? His demand is a great one, but it's not that we be great, but it's that we cease being great in our own eyes. That we become small so that we can make his greatness appear what it is. Great. We serve a great God. Jesus put it this way. He said, it's not the well who need a physician, but those who are sick. Jesus had nothing to do for those who insisted that they're well. He demands something great, and that is that you and I admit that we're not great. Do you see how that's bad news for those who are arrogant and pride-filled? But boy, they're words of honey to those who understand that we've been oppressed and that we've got to give up that charade of self-sufficiency and spend more time seeking God. He can be found. He can fill empty hearts. And God will be greatly magnified. I beseech you by the mercies of God to clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, and in due time he may exalt you. Can I tell you the greatest time when you show the greatness of God is when you see the greatness of the salvation that he offers everyone. And you humble yourself by saying, I need the salvation that's offered in Jesus Christ. One more slide. Psalms 34:3 says, oh, magnify the Lord with me, and let's exalt his name together. If you need to respond to the invitation that Christ gives you, we invite you to do it as we stand and sing this song. Will you come?